Hello everybody. My name is Mike, and thanks to Eilish for the wonderful introduction. As Eilish stated, I'm one of the team here, so I'm more than used to being on the other side of the curtain, so permit me a little bit to use notes rather than speaking off of a perfectly manicured speech shift. I can remember crystal clearly the first time I was called a faggot in school. It was a sense of confusion more so than anything else. I didn't know what the word meant. I was 8 years of age. The only thing that struck me was the venom with which this older kid in school just lobbed this word at me for absolutely no reason. And I remember the confusion escalating even more when I asked my mum what it meant. Because when she explained it to me, and it turned out to be absolutely nothing that should be an issue whatsoever, my only question is, well, why were people throwing this insult at us, and why was this word being bandied around in school like it was an absolutely terrible swear? And the more and more that it got bandied around as we grew from 8-year-olds into teenagers, and the more that people just got, used to saying so, swearing, and not being told by an adult what to do or what to say without any thought or recourse as to how hurtful your words were, we weren't taught that othering was a thing. We weren't taught that these words that were being thrown around as kind of jockey symbols of masculinity were being told, that we weren't told that they were someone else's lived experience. We weren't told that they were somebody else's feelings. And I think in retrospect, it kind of all turns back to what we're taught about masculinity and what a man should be going ahead forward. At the early outset of the planning of this night, we kind of had a little jokey idea of, or I had a little jokey idea of, okay, well, what if we had like a little night upstairs in like the Spalpeen or some other place like that, who kind of sat around, talked about our feelings, and then watched Saturday morning cartoons afterwards. And obviously that's not as permissive to the TEDx format as possible, but what started as a joke and as an excuse to utter the words Cork Meninisto on Facebook to see who would react, became a proper thing. Eilish and other people jumped on it in the comments section, and it became an idea that people literally hopped on. And we thought, oh yeah, that's nice, that's something that we can put on file away for something that we can do in the future. But a funny thing happened as that discussion was going on, and people started talking about a need for a male mental health space and for a discussion on what masculinity in particular is today, and tackling the concept. The legacy, I suppose, of the austerity and of the recession really hit home in terms of mental health services available to men, and discussion of the men's shed came up, and discussion of other mental health aspects and ideas that are available to men now that weren't available a generation ago. Got us talking about what we were taught as kids, and what we were taught. And the classic Irish man, I'm sure everybody, when they hold it in mind what our grandfathers were like, the strong, silent types, of De Valera's isolationist agrarian policy, the lads that went out, De Valera's ideal, you went out and you toiled 12 hours a day in the fields, you said nothing about your feelings and what have you, and you just kind of dealt with things as they came along. And this obviously played on, or this amplified social issues that already existed in the Irish conscience, post-famine, post-occupation, that sort of thing. And as time wore on, and as Ireland became, or the current Ireland that we're currently kind of escaping with current social liberalism, as that wore on and became more its foundations were built, really the problems for male mental health became, they became crystallized. We think of our grandparents, we think of our parents, and we think about them being quiet, and we think about them kind of just being steely in terms of their resolve. But we also think then about how Ireland became more globalised, and about how international media became a thing. And by the time my childhood rolled around in the late 1980s, Ireland had its George Best, which was pretty much like our equivalent of Beatlemania. We were beginning to see the chinks in the armour a little bit in the church's piety, with the ongoing struggle with contraception and so on and so forth. So by the time our childhood came around, satellite telly had come in. And not only had we kind of inherited the idea of the strong, silent type as an archetypal Irishman, we're also dealing with brash and loud masculinity archetypes from all over the world. And my childhood, personally, was spent every Saturday morning into the neighbour's house to watch pro wrestling. With all due respect to one of our speakers tonight, Blake Norton. And it was always in to watch these larger-than-life, bulked up, steroided up mastodons like Hulk Hogan and The Ultimate Warrior and Stone Cold Steve Austin and all of this. So a restrictive form of masculinity was countered by this hyper-real alternate masculinity that we were given that didn't really, that just as much as like the strong silent type wasn't emotionally realistic, neither too was the Ultimate Warrior turning up and talking gibberish about the power of the warriors and the elephants rampling up his back and so on and so forth. So as that time went on and, you know, our generation went from kids to teenagers and, you know, the Premier League became a big thing, and all of a sudden, as a child, it became a thing to pattern yourself after soccer stars and all of this. You know, kids will drag bits and pieces of their identity from everywhere because it's part of the learning curve. And as generations of Irish men wore on, masculinity and the male identity became ever sort of more warped, really. But as we became grown-ups and the great, the great worldwide recession turned into a domestic depression, we found that the strong silent type that De Valera had pushed for so much in his ideal Ireland had been supplanted. I mean, like, his people had brought along, or had at least helped along, a recession that, you know, in combination with cultural changes, really made his vision of Irish masculinity obsolete. And where we find ourselves now in terms of male mental health is picking up those pieces and reevaluating traditional masculinity and the filters through which we look through it. And as the evening wears on, a lot of our speakers will be talking about their personal struggles with traditional masculinity and these monoliths of expectations of masculinity with which they were faced and compared themselves against. But it's only in recent times that we've seen the effects of it, that in 3 generations of young Irishmen, we are now seeing the point where it is completely unsustainable, the old days and the old ways and the old stoic, strong Irishman that never betrays his feelings or represses everything, and then it unfortunately has always manifested itself in other ways. Let's talk about institutional drinking. But also, again, we're a provider, or we're supposed to be providers with restricted, if not non-existent, means of provision. You know, the lack of jobs, unpaid internships, massive or the deaths of certain major industries. All of these things have snowballed, and I'm going to break out a disaffected millennial stereotype here, and say that it's only been in recent times that people like Blind Boy Boat Club, who uses comedy so expertly as a means of saying whatever he wants, and he can cut straight down to the bone of an argument, talking about male feminism. And, you know, obviously I don't want to take this into male feminist territory. But essentially what we're doing is, with masculinity, and particularly with the Night Tonight, I'd like for us to kind of look at traditional masculinity and the archetypes with which we are handed and really kind of reevaluate them, you know, really kind of examine what we're going to do to tackle them. And most importantly, how we're going to carry that tackling of the issue forward. Because it starts with our young men coming up. And it starts with kind of instilling in them an empathy that maybe wasn't there, or maybe was less to the fore, where, you know, we teach children that, you know, calling someone a faggot or using racial epithets or being edgy on the internet is denigrating people's lived experience. Pardon me now while I kind of refer to my notes. Yeah. That we kind of reevaluate our traditional masculinity inside, that we kind of examine our own relationship as men with masculinity and kind of see what we can do in our own selves, look at it compared to our own circumstances and realistically what we can achieve, which is important. But also we can start the conversation. And this is what TEDxCorkSalon is all about, and what Eilish and Joe and Tina have enabled in their year running this event, is that we can reach out to others. And we can see people that are suffering. We can see people that are obviously struggling under, I suppose, the weight of traditional masculinity, or struggling under the weight of expectation as to how they should carry themselves. And in as much as, like, not a call-out culture, where we look at ourselves and our mistakes and we call out other dudes for, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, but rather engage in respectful debate and do what powerful people do of any gender, and that's help each other up as opposed to knocking each other down. Thank you very much.